One of the most interesting features and discussions of the Ideas Festival. This has become an annual tradition. The editors of The Atlantic and a number of us from the Institute each year get together and decide what kind of poll we ought to do that would relate to some of the themes that we've been discussing in one or more of the tracks of the festival. And this year, we decided we wanted to focus on American values, and especially to try to probe how those values either divide us or unite us, how divided we are as a country. And obviously, the whole track, the America track, has resonated with those themes. This is the fifth consecutive year, I think, isn't it, that we have been engaged with the superb polling team at Penn in Berlin, which is part of Gerson Marsteller, and we're delighted to have their involvement again this year. So, just a few days before the most unifying single holiday in the American calendar, we actually issued a press release yesterday about the results of this poll. And it's a poll that, as Mark Penn in a few minutes will tell you about, it shows that 20% of Americans doubt that the United States can remain united as one nation, and that we may be, in fact, more divided as a nation than any time in recent decades, if not longer. As I said, we'll be presenting this, and then we'll have a conversation afterwards with Mark and also two others. Let me just introduce each of them. I think most of them are now familiar to you, even if those of you who've just been here on this particular track. Mark Penn is now, he was the CEO of Gerson Marsteller and the founder of Penn Berlin. He's now corporate vice president of Microsoft. He had for many years been a key senior advisor to Bill Gates. Now he's an in-house advisor to Bill Gates. He's also been a senior advisor to Bill Clinton, to Hillary Clinton, to Tony Blair, and many other political and business leaders. Joining him are two people who are very close to the Aspen Institute, very close to this event. James Bennet, of course, is the editor of The Atlantic, and under his brilliant editorial leadership, I think it's fair to say that The Atlantic is again at a pinnacle of its intellectual reach and influence in the United States. Also delighted to say that it is actually a profitable magazine, and that's a rare bird indeed these days. And the reach of the magazine is also reflected in the fact that its online unique visitors have grown from about, 500,000 or so when James started this job to more than 10 million unique visitors a month today.
More than 20.
20? That's just happened since the Ideas Festival began. Who's counting? Who's counting? What do I know? And Baer is the chairman and CEO of Gerson Marsteller and chairman of Penn Berlin. He, before that, had a career in the communications business. He was a senior executive at Discovery Channel and Discovery Communications, and also, of course, was head of a White House communications office, chief speech writer in the White House. So we have a terrific group of panelists to talk about this poll. But first, let's begin. Mark, if you could bring us through a summary of the poll that we've just done. And let me mention, this is a summary. The full poll in all of its detail is available already at the Atlantic.com website and also at the Aspen Ideas Festival website and the Aspen Institute website. Mark, over to you.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to present the Atlantic Aspen Institute Annual American Value Survey, One Nation Divisible. I think, as you'll find in this poll, the Americans are divided about whether or not they're divided, and that will be the central finding. In fact, what you'll find is Americans want to be united, but they're one of the few peoples that want to be united in division, and that actually is at the core of the American spirit from the beginning. And I'm pleased to present a Penn Berlin poll I may have sold the company, but I'm still selling the polls. So,
we appreciate that.
This is a very substantial poll. It's 2,000 interviews, 1,000 done by telephone, 1,000 done online. Together, polling methods are in transition between phone and internet, and this poll bridges, I think, both of them, and it's reflective of the American population as a whole weighted to census demographics. So, if you take a look at where is America right now, America right now is, generally speaking, do you think things in the country are in the right track or the wrong track? Really, 59% say wrong track. You know, the truth of the matter is this is the longest sustained period of American pessimism and unhappiness, I think, since polls have been recorded. Typically, Americans think the country's on the wrong track 2 or 3 years. At this point, an entire generation, really of the last almost 10 years now, has been in a mood where they're unhappy with the direction of the country, whether a Republican is governing them or whether a Democrat is governing them. And while these numbers have moved from 63 to 59, that would barely be statistically significant. It's a slight movement, although the right track has moved from 28 to 35. Same thing in general, is the US economy on the right track or the wrong track? Most people say the wrong track in 2013. It's down 6 or 7% from what it was in 2012. So there's been some improvement. 2010, which was even closer to the financial crisis, the mood was actually closer today. But the fundamental notion that a solid majority think that it's on the wrong track is also fundamental to an unhappy or divided, electorate or polity. So what do you think is the most important issue facing the country? That was in 2012 jobs. It is in 2013 jobs, but it's less so. It's more divided. There are more people who are concerned about the deficit, healthcare, big government, bureaucracy, moral values. It's a little bit more divided. As unemployment has come down from its heights of 10% to the levels that it's at now of around 7.5%, certainly I think that you see some of the concern about jobs has diminished. So the United States of America, which is really the subject of this poll, 97% want America to remain united as a country. And 73% say this is an important value. So generally, how important is it for you that America be united? So people do like very much the idea of a United States of America. It's really how they view the country in the ideal. But then we asked them, would you say that America has become more united over the past 10 years, or has it become more divided? So those red bars there are the somewhat and very much more divided, right? And they add up to 71% of the population, and that really blue bar, much more united, is 8%. So you can say that the country is united on feeling more divided, would be the actual finding of the poll. And they think that pretty much they're more divided. Do you think that we're more or less divided today than we were in the 40s? 60% say we're more divided today. 49% say than the 50s. 51% say than in the 70s. So in general, people have a notion, true or not, because people's recall of the past is often nostalgic and therefore usually completely unreliable. But as they kind of rank this in historical patterns, they see this as up there. In fact, when you compare this to the Great Depression, are we more united today or more divided? The only time when they say we are more united today, right, 39% is in the civil rights era, right? Other than that, more divided today, Vietnam War, 38% more divided today, than in the past. So they see American society as fundamentally having divisions which has been true through these various periods of history where Americans have come, to be combative about issues, right? Then we asked them about the future. Do you think America will remain united as one country? And here you have to decide whether the glass is half full or half empty, or in this case, a fifth empty. 20% did not expect that the country would be able to really remain united. The rest really thought, or was optimistic, and thought even if the country is not united now, it will essentially in the future be able to be united. And so you could look at that question both ways. Most importantly, what do you think would help, make America more united, right? Equal opportunity is the number one value or development, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. But it's so interesting that people here go to economic, political, religious freedoms, which are by their nature pluralistic, as defining how America gets along. And that's from the history of America and the history of America being a country where they would accept pluralism. It's the acceptance of pluralism in America which is the definition almost of getting along and being united. Which do you think contributes to America being divided? Money in politics was number one, congressional gridlock number two, inequality number three, extremism, racial differences all got significant votes. People were allowed to pick several of these in order to see. But money in politics, true or not, perception is that money in politics is helping to divide the country. And if you went back to the last presidential campaign, you would find that about 90% of all advertisements from all parties were negative in nature, right? And so the money is fueling a greater and greater sense of negativity. What do you think America could do to become more united, hold politicians more united, cooperation by Republicans and Democrats, limit the power of the federal government? They look for a less powerful government, and they look for more cooperation and unity in Washington. In fact, they hold the politicians responsible for the divisions. What steps could elected officials take to make America more united, encourage meetings between the parties, reduce bureaucracy, increase transparency? Again, the first thought is, if our politicians would get along and solve problems, we'd be moving forward more as a country, and we would be reflecting the ideal of pluralism that gets together, united in a common interest. Who do you think is the most unifying figure, and who do you think is the most divisive figure? Those happen to be the same person. Now, in a world of microtrends, it's not surprising that society goes in more than one direction. It is not surprising that Democrats find Barack Obama the most unifying figure, and that Republicans, in turn, find Barack Obama the most divisive figure.
Did you get word to Bill Gates yet that he's one of the most unifying figures?
Which of the following leaders best embodies America, unity historically? 3 presidents came out above the rest. Abraham Lincoln, again, fascinating that the person who ran a civil war in this country is seen as the most unifying president in history. Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy. George Washington, third, Roosevelt and Clinton, statistically indistinguishable from George Washington and FDR. What parts of the Pledge of Allegiance do you think apply to America today? This is kind of an interesting question. I can't say that anybody's ever asked it before, but it's sort of a kind of a bouncy ball question. One nation, yes. Under God, maybe. Indivisible, not really. With liberty, the highest, almost the highest score as opposed to one nation. And justice, maybe. And for all, maybe, right? And the fact that all the numbers are right there around 50% shows right there the division about the country. Those numbers and other times you might have figured would be 80 or 85%. Issues that unify and divide us. What values are most important for America to unite around? Moral and family values. They see those as unifying values, a common sense of what's fundamentally right or wrong, and the importance of family. Almost 80% in this poll say family first in their life. There's tremendous importance seen for family. What do you think it's okay for Americans to be divided on? Religion and politics. The Americans define disunity by disunity in religion and politics. They expect that. It's how well we tolerate it and how well we reconcile it that says how well the country moves forward. How united do you think America is on the following social issues? Immigration, divided. Gun control, divided, 80%. Homosexuality, divided. Gay marriage, divided. Abortion, divided. So again, Americans see broad-scale divisions on the social issues. Divorce, closer to not divided, but still halfway divided. Prostitution, closer. Having a child of wedlock, something that might have been huge divisive, less so. Climate change, something that would have been more divisive before, less so. Drugs, something that still has a fair amount of division, but less so. Interesting between the first and second page. Then we ask people what's objectionable morally, what's acceptable morally, and then we compared, if you look at the two lines, last year and this year that had the same questions. Generally, no real statistical change between last year and this year. They're all within the same range. An unmarried couple living together, arguably, I think that'd be out of the range of statistically, that'd be the biggest jump in 2013. But if you look at interracial marriage, right, you look at this, majorities basically for everything, majority find premarital sex now to be acceptable, right? And they reject physician-assisted suicide as morally wrong. Again, the biggest change being more and more tolerance or acceptance of unmarried couple living together. I always point out that more and more of the older generation now have gotten divorced and now live in sin after having told their kids not to. Sex education in schools, again, generally a consensus issue. Divorce, homosexuality, more divisive. Smoking marijuana itself, still, even though it's being essentially legalized in many jurisdictions, divisive. And abortion, if you look at it, again, one of the few issues here, 3%, moving the other way. More concerns, more questions about abortion. Yet people think it should definitely be legal, but they certainly also think it should be safe and rare when you look at the numbers. Role of the American economy, and I know I'm deliberately moving you guys very quickly so that you can get to the debate. How important is it for the free market economy in helping individuals to reach the American dream? Free market economy got pretty good score on that, right? A majority saying very and 38% saying somewhat. That means 94% think that the free market economy is important. Does the free enterprise system do more to unite or divide us at this point? 68% said unite. It does more to unite us. At the same time, there's so much concern about money in politics, and there is concern about reducing the gap between the rich and the poor, right? 81% said that they thought that that was extremely important. So you see in this support, a lot of across the board, across the generations support, by the way, for the capitalist system, but concern about some of the effects of the system at the same time reaching very high levels. Finally, religion in America, if you go back, we're now up to about 10% that say they do not believe in God. Most people in the country, almost 90%, believe in God, regardless of whether or not they attend a church regularly. That figure didn't change in the last year. It's dramatically different between older and younger generation. Do you think religion does more to unite Americans or divide it? Actually, people were more united around the capitalist system than they were around religion. To me, perhaps one of the most fascinating questions I think I've seen in the last 20 years, which of the following is closer to your view? I believe in evolution only, 20%. I believe in a combination of evolution and creationism, 48%. I believe in creationism only, 29%. That would be 45% of those over 65. It's unclear who would win the Scopes trial today with these numbers, but only 20% believe in evolution only. An absolutely interesting question. When you look at that, 90% believe in God, and you therefore have 48, you have about 80% who believe in a form of creationism as opposed to evolution only being consistent with that. So I think what that is that's an overview. You know, the country sees itself as more divided. They're focusing on the politicians. They're focusing on some of the gaps between rich and poor, between money and politics. They'd like to see our politicians bring things together. Morally, the society becomes more and more tolerant overall, but concerns about abortion are the one issue of this whole thing that I think goes slightly the other way, with more concerns about it. So with that as an introduction, thanks. Let me turn it back over to Elliot.
Thanks, Mark. So Don, it seems to me this suggests that we feel disunited, we want to be united, and we don't much like our political leaders.
Yeah. Well, first off, I want to thank everyone at Aspen, at the Atlantic, at Gerson, Marsteller, and Penn, and Berlin, and Mark for this. As Elliot said, this is the 5th year we've been doing it. One of the great things is you saw we've asked some of the questions we asked last year again this year, and if we're lucky enough to be able to do this going forward, we're going to continue to do it so that we begin to get a real sense of the trend lines on some of these key values issues. And this is a very, very rich poll. There's a lot here that we can't go into. I strongly encourage you to go to theatlantic.com, run those numbers up a little bit more, spend some time with it, because there's a lot of great material here that I think in many aspects of what you're doing you're going to find useful. Yeah, when we started this project, I wondered if we would find out, given all the anger and frustration that one side versus the other side has in the big debates that are going on in the country, whether we would find people who said, I don't want to be in the same country anymore with those kinds of people. I'm ready for us to split. And I figured it would make a great headline and we'd be able to get even more numbers to theatlantic.com. Turns out that's not the case, right? I think what this says is the country feels divided, but that they are yearning to be united. And even one number that we didn't talk about, given the religiosity of the country, 90%, pretty much everyone, believes that we should tolerate the differences that there are, that it's possible to have differences in this country around religion and we can live together, right? 90%. You don't find that in many, many parts of the rest of the world. In fact, you don't find it in most other parts of the rest of the world. So it's a country that believes in tolerance. It wants to be divided. But I think, and the reference that you see repeatedly to the political leadership, I think it's a country that feels unled. I think that it's a country that wants to be united, doesn't quite know how to get there. Even some of the solutions that are recommended are not very concrete. Wants to get there, doesn't know how to, thinks its leaders ought to be doing more to move it in that direction. And I might even go a little bit further. Not only that it feels unled, it may feel misled, because the conversation that is being led by the leaders is very much about difference rather than similarity and common ground. And so I think that's a very strong strain of what's coming through.
Yeah, and
here.
it is interesting, when we were putting the poll together, we were wondering, because there have been some things written, not just Texas secessionists, but there are even some people from the Northeast, the West Coast, who had written after the last election looking at fairly consistently blue America, red America. Well, maybe we'd be better off if the Confederacy had, were a different country,
yeah.
and people on both sides. We didn't find any evidence of that at all. James, one thing I found interesting is that equal opportunity showed up as the most unifying value, but at the same time, things like money and politics were the most, disunifying. And I wonder if those are somehow two sides of the same coin.
Well, I'd actually say that's right, but it's sort of unifying. We're kind of unified in sharing a pervasive anxiety about money in American life, to a degree that really surprised me in this poll. Jim Fallows, I don't know how many people made it to the opening this year, but Jim, my colleague at the Atlantic,
Gilded Era.
You talked about the Gilded Age and of the late 19th century, early 20th century, and wondered if we would see a reaction to it, an intellectual, moral, and political reaction to it, as we saw then, in the form of populist politics, possibly. And there's kind of a lot of evidence in this poll that there's fertile ground for it. Just to emphasize some of the results Mark just walked through, 59% say money in politics is a source of division. 81% say that reducing the gap between rich and poor is either very or somewhat important to American unity. 62% of Americans, including a plurality of Republicans, say elected officials mainly reflect the values of the wealthy. And 63% of Americans, including nearly half of Republicans, say big corporations have too much power. You know, in the last election cycle, the only candidate I heard that I remember kind of articulating a concern about bigness was actually Rick Santorum, who got some pretty big crowds in New Hampshire. And it echoed actually the Pat Buchanan message of '96, and he got a little tangled up in the social issues in the end. But it suggests there might be an opening here for maybe a Rand Paul or somebody else. And just closing on this thought, I was struck 2 days ago, there was a panel on the future of the Republican Party here. Right. Karl Rove was on that panel. And in the course of lamenting some of the state of American life today, he said, there are too many breaks that benefit the big guys and the people that have already got it, which is kind of a new note for him to sound.
No, but he actually advocated that the Republican Party build into its agenda taking on corporate welfare.
Let's stay on that. And by the way, I'm going to open it up to questions here very shortly, so please be thinking of some. Mark, with all the work you've done as a political advisor too, let's just stay on this theme of populism. I mean, do you see a possibility for even more populist politics? I mean, we see in Europe now the rise of populist parties. It's in Latin America, and in some cases even uniting left wing and right wing together. Is there any possibility for something like that here?
Well, I think first, after the financial crisis, which people really squarely blame the banks for the financial crisis, I think you really have a wave of as yet unsatisfied anti-corporate attitudes. People feel that the companies were responsible for this. They didn't really pay a price for it. And I do think that's sitting out there. I think that it's quite different, about populism in generally. There's a large group of the population now, if you look at it, the average voter has gone to college. There's been a dramatic change in education, a dramatic growth of a professional class. So there's a lot of conflict out there in this poll because young people and old people strongly endorse, I think, the capitalist system. At the same time, they have these concerns about rich and poor, about equal opportunity, and how you get there, right? And so this is going to be a big fight. Now, someone could come along, right, like a Pat Buchanan, and try to just take one piece of the leg and say, well, it's time we really gin things up and could create a movement, right, that might be 20, 30% of the country. But what they're really looking for is a resolution of this, a resolution that holds corporations accountable and responsible, but provides Americans with opportunity for the future.
Actually, on that view of capitalism, and maybe we can come back to some of these questions next year. Your view about the vast majority being comfortable with the free market system depends on, I think it was 38% who said somewhat. And I think you made somewhat meaning sort of more than 50%. If you read somewhat to mean a little, it's not quite so clear. But Don,
just to emphasize one other number in here though, Mark, it's barely 4 in 10 Americans say today's wealthy people got there by working harder than anyone else. So there is this confidence in this, there's this support for the system, but also a fear that it's really unjust. It's rigged.
And we've been talking about that in many of our sessions the last few days. I don't know if Chrystia Freeland's here. She talked about her new book, and I think maybe next year we should drill down even more on the widening gap of income and increasingly attitudes toward those at the top.
Yet it's so interesting that so much of the political debate, I think, because of the Electoral College, gets driven around manufacturing companies and how can we bring manufacturing. But if you look here, and biased maybe perhaps that I now work for a tech company, there's tremendous faith here in innovation and technology for being the place where American companies and enterprise could really grow and lead the way. So it's just not one pot. I think that in fact there's many different parts of that stew.
And Don, while there's a lot of agreement and unity on issues, we can't deny that on some so-called social issues, the country really is still fundamentally divided. and whether it's abortion, guns, gay marriage. And I wonder if elections are still, or primary elections are still based very much on those issues, even though I think only 4 or 5% of Americans had those social and moral values as being the most important for unifying. They do, it seems, still greatly divide us. And we have a difference between religious and social conservatives who feel very, very strongly on those issues, and they vote on those issues. And whether it's liberals or secular conservatives on economic issues who don't share those views. So as long as there is those divisions, and we still have elections in many cases around those divisions, aren't we destined to continue to have this kind of problem?
Well, I think we're destined to have those be influences. But first off, the fact that economic issues and how to create equal opportunity and a rising tide that will help many people still remains overwhelmingly the most important issue, means that that's going to continue to be what drives most of this. But as we've seen, we see it time and again. Look, in 2008, in the Democratic primaries, the war played a big role in helping to determine some of where people came out. We saw in the Republican primaries in 2012 clearly that the social issues played a big role in helping to continue that primary, probably certainly well past when Mitt Romney and his campaign hoped it would continue. So these things are going to continue to have factors. But I do think, Elliot, you look at gay marriage, which of course this very week we've had a major Supreme Court decision on, and I was having breakfast this morning with Elena Kagan, and we were talking about the poll results here as related to that. You have to look at trend lines, and in this snapshot you're not going to see the trend line. So there has been a dramatic movement towards acceptance of gay marriage in the last 15 years for sure, and I suspect we're going to continue to see that accelerate.
Did you want to add something?
I just want to throw in a couple of extra data points about where the generations agree. If you look at 18 to 29, I'll look at where they agree. An unmarried man and woman living together, 83% of those 18 to 29 say that's okay, but 59% of those 65 and plus say that's okay too. So that's not a big disagreement. I notice on premarital sex, 71% of the young people say it's okay, and only 40% of the 65 plus. So there are a lot of people who say it's okay for unmarried men and women to live together as long as they don't have sex.
Or maybe they have to be over 65.
Very sweet.
But if you look at where they are divided, basically on gay marriage or homosexuality in general, 66% of those 18 to 29 now said that was morally acceptable, compared to only 34% of those 65 plus. So it's 66-34 among young people. It's a mirror image, 34-62 among those 65 plus. Most fascinating, the biggest divide of all was on violent video games, movies, and TVs. Young people who watched them, unsurprisingly, said that was acceptable, 72-28, and old people said it was unacceptable, 15-82.
So, James, let's talk a little bit about what can be done about these attitudes and frustrations about division. Don was suggesting that we're looking for new leaders. Looking at the poll and looking at the thirst for unity, more unity, even though, as Mark and others have said, it's not like we expect everyone to agree, but we want to be unified in a pluralistic, respectful system. What are some of the things you think, from your perspective, actually could be done? I mean, campaign finance, other kinds of election law changes, electoral college, redistricting, or do we just have to hope for different kinds of leaders?
I mean, it's one place where the poll, through no fault of the poll or the respondents, is just not very satisfying, because they're saying we want our politicians to come together, we want solutions to these problems, but it doesn't really point us in any particular direction. And the solutions are the ones we've been talking about, some of them anyway, that are appealing to me, are some of the ones we've been talking about all week. Redistricting, is a tremendous, gerrymandered districts that drive people to the extremes rather than forcing competition that pushes candidates toward the center. The possibility of open primaries I find very, very appealing, in which you wind up with the two top vote getters in a primary that would include candidates of any party, then facing each other in the general election. So you could wind up having a conservative Republican and a moderate Republican competing in the general election. Again, the effect of that would be, one hopes, and who knows what the unintended consequences might be, but the hopes would be to force them to talk about actual solutions rather than articulate a more extreme politics that doesn't really get us anywhere in Washington.
Just one more question, and then we'll open it up. I mean, Mark, you noted how surprising, many of these things were very surprising, like Lincoln, 700,000 people dead, Civil War, assassinated, most unifying. I assume maybe either that's not a reflection of people not understanding history, or maybe it's because he wanted to keep the country unified that he was viewed that way. But you mentioned the evolution thing too, and that really was extraordinary. From a scientific perspective, evolution's as certain as the Earth rotating around the sun, yet we have numbers in this country based on comparative figures that I've seen. The only other countries that have those kind of figures against evolution are fundamentalist Muslim, predominantly Muslim countries where most of the people aren't educated at all. We have a huge gap with Western Europe. What explains that?
Well, I think that, people are divided, I think, in their own minds and intellectual hearts between religion and science. And so I think in this question they said, give me both. And so that's why most people said, somehow it must be a combination of evolution and creationism. We may have evolved, but somehow they do believe that we were created. And I think that's clear when you say 90% believe in God. And so you have to, when you listen to people carefully, how do they reconcile their belief in God with that? That's the only answer they really could give.
America accepts Pascal's wager.
But Mark, did you mention?
That's not about evolution.
Did you mention the climate change result in the? Because in some ways that cuts the other way, and I thought it was very interesting.
Well, but in climate change, as I recall, only 9% now don't believe in climate change. Half and half think it's either caused by man or caused naturally. So I think if you look at that, that's something where there's been tremendous change, because I remember President Clinton gave really the first speech on it, when most people didn't believe that it existed at all.
Can we get the lights on so I can see any questions from the audience, and otherwise I can, and we have microphones. So we have a question here in the middle on the left. If you just could wait for the microphone, please.
Tell us more about the 20%, if you will, who don't envisage a unified America. Who are they, and why is it they are so disaffected?
It's spread across the country, and it's spread across demographic groups. There tends to be a slightly larger proportion of them in the South and in the West, which perhaps you would imagine, given differences of attitude. We could have asked that question a different way, to say, do you want to remain, in the United States of America? We didn't go straight for the secessionist question. But it's interesting, and I think some of it is also just a reflection, not that they think we won't be one country anymore, but that they are recognizing we are divided. The trend lines seem to be towards us being more divided. It's the same overall thesis of the poll. And they don't see anything that's a circuit breaker to that over time.
And more conservatives would like to secede than not.
Yes, in the middle. We have to, it's a bit of a steeplechase to get microphones to you, but we do want, we're recording this, so bear with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Shelley Porges, Washington, D.C., ready for Hillary Pack. I just to be clear, I was just curious, the number that you have up there about Americans being concerned about money in politics, whether you were able to correlate that with the way people vote.
No, I think that if I go through it, it's probably more Democrats than not, but that was a pretty high number, so it was a pretty universal, is a concern. It's one of those questions that I think that on the one hand they say that they don't like the influence of money politics. On the other hand, what's really happened is we did not have a tradition of people giving to political campaigns, a broad scale tradition of people giving. And so there are two things that are pumping money into the system. One, those that are very rich now can put in unlimited amounts, and actually now you can raise on the internet, lots of small contributions. I don't know whether or not they'd object to one over the other. right? Or see one as more or less, pernicious as the other. But they see it, look, people, anytime money gets close to politics, what people see is the potential for corruption and corrosion. And so that's how they view it. Now, in this case, also the Obama campaign was able to run a campaign where they could touch millions and millions of voters directly because they did it on a much larger scale. I used to say we used to spend more marketing a hamburger than we did on our presidential campaigns. Now I can say we spend more on our presidential campaigns than on hamburgers, right? Or at least close.
And our hamburgers are not better
And
for
so I think it's a complicated issue, but I think it is a populist issue, and it is highlighted by individuals who spend a lot of money on individual causes as potentially being corrosive, despite the Supreme Court saying the opposite.
Can I just,
Please, Don.
one of the things that leaps out at you, right, everything else we say, is that people think our political system is messed up, big time, right? And they're very frustrated by it. And we should understand that given what the last 2 or 3 years have been like in terms of not just how it's covered, but what's going on in our political system. I don't know whether it's correlated to the question of money in politics, but we didn't put it up. When we asked people what they thought the most divisive event was in America in the last decade, the re-election of Barack Obama. So I'm not pitching or catching on that one. I'm just telling you that's what they say. Whether it's related to the nature not just of his campaign, but the whole campaign season that we came through in 2012, I don't know, but it begins to raise some questions about that.
Don, just thinking for a second, you also see a lot of polls done for your commercial clients. And I'm wondering if we just leave the political environment for a second, if you see any parallels in what you see when you're polling for products or marketing or brand that resonate with what we saw politically?
Well, that's an interesting question, and many of you are in business, and I'll do it quickly, because you do see, it struck me looking at this, that there have been things that I have seen in research on behalf of corporate and consumer-based clients in the last, say, 6 to 8 months that kind of resonate here. And in broad terms, and I've seen this for major retailers, major banks, major auto companies. So these are companies that are really reaching many Americans in a lot of ways. On the one, you see a thing that seems like it's in tension, like there's a dichotomy going on. On the one hand, people are saying they want a stronger sense of community. And I think you can feel the resonance of this just in the country broadly, not just in the consumer sector. They want a larger sense of community. What do they mean by that? They want to believe that someone is watching their back, right? Given what we've gone through as a country, they want to believe that things are not just arm's length transactions, entirely. That in fact, there's someone watching out for them and we're all in this together. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, given that it's been a while since the economy has moved forward, people have had to sort of slow their sense of aspiration and ambition, they really want a new sense of striving, right? They want to be moving out again. And so there, in my view, is some tension between this notion of community and aspiration, ambition. But it gets resolved, and you're seeing this, you may not know it yet, but you're seeing it in certain campaigns that some of these companies are doing. It gets resolved around a notion of success, the aspiration, that is shared, right? That there's a notion that we're all in this together, we're a big bank, but we're not here just to pick your pocket. We're here when you succeed, we succeed more, and that's what we want to enable. Or think of any other kind of consumer product that you can imagine. So that shared success notion, I think, is where I believe we will also see, notwithstanding the populist piece of this, a lot more of the political conversation moving for those who want to succeed in the next several years.
Okay.
Let me just add to Don's answer. That's interesting. At the same time that we crave unity and respect division, we have become more combative as a society and less conciliatory, right? At least in words, right? And so if you compare the most negative mediums, the national news media, Atlantic and so forth, not even close. Facebook and Twitter are the most negative mediums. About 60% of all comments on those mediums will be negative comments.
And
right?
sometimes viciously negative.
Sometimes viciously, and people will think, oh, so nice, we'll do something on Facebook. That is, that is really, it may be very nice, let me just say, to do something on Facebook, but it is where criticism comes out. Look at America's top shows. They're always throwing people off islands. They're firing them, okay? right? Look at cable TV and the growth of it. It's all based on this more combative style that Americans seem to actually like. That's reflected in our culture, our movies, our political campaigns.
Yeah, well, what negative advertising, I mean, it works. I mean, you've been in this business. I mean, we all complain about it, but why does it keep happening?
Well,
and
it's
why is
starting
it so nasty?
It's starting to creep into the commercial space, really, for the first time. We were talking about this before, which is fascinating.
So,
All right, back. Yes, right in the front, in the middle. Please wait for the microphone.
Great. So George Mitchell spoke on a panel yesterday, and his contention was really that if we took care of the economy and jobs, then a lot of the other social issues would be really impacted positively, and he still sees that as the core issue. So having just come through the recession that was the worst since the 1930s, how much of what you think you're seeing in the polls about division and so forth is just related to the economic cycle and will actually naturally slip away as the economy recovers?
I think it's a lot. Just
Don?
period. Number one, I think it's a lot. But having said that, there will still be these divisive issues. So even if we get back on a solid growth path, you're still going to have people. And there's an argument to be made. Once you're on a solid growth path and people are feeling less anxious, that's when they turn to these other issues. So,
yeah, I just want to underscore that I'm very concerned about the deep pessimism. That this long-term sustained, if you're an 18-year-old from the age 10 to now, or even almost a 20-year-old, I have to go back to the exact date, you would not have known a time when Americans thought the country was on the right track, right? And that's almost from just a little bit after 9/11. And that is just a fundamental change in the psychology that is going to have long-term consequences for how people view. This has always been a can-do, optimistic country, right? That has fueled, success when people thought we couldn't have success. And what does this long-term pessimism do for that? I don't think we know the answer to
We
that.
have a gentleman back here, and Doug, if you could bring the microphone and the gentleman over here for the next question, please.
This is a poll of the general public, yet your comments largely reflect views about voting. But what if you ran exactly this poll, not among the general public, but among likely voters as best defined, registered likely voters? You know how those differences are. What do you think the differences would be?
Very interesting question.
Yeah, I don't think from these poll results, I really don't think they'd be sharply different. I have to say, looking at these in terms of the findings that we've got and about the percentages that are on the wrong track, I think these are pretty consistent if we had just had the screen here of just registered voter. Now, likely voters and who actually votes, I think is changing dramatically, right? Because I think that, I think the Democrats and Obama had a huge success in generating turnout in their favor. I think in the last election, I think in Bush's reelection, Rove had an opportunity where they generated turnout more. So the answer to that varies now from election to election. It's not as clear, but I don't think that there'd be much difference with if I just went to registered voters, you wouldn't really see much difference in this.
Can I want to speak to the pessimism point, and it maybe relates to this as well. Eileen Lynch, you're here, right? You're going to be here. Yep. Oh, there you are. Okay, good. So Eileen is with Thomson Reuters, a client of ours. I just want to say something about the professional class poll that has just come out, was announced yesterday and released yesterday. It's a piece of work that we've been working on with Eileen and the people at Thomson Reuters for over a year now. One thing that has leapt out at me, because this is a big, big survey, the most extensive survey ever done of professionals around the world. This country, other developed countries, developing countries. And one factoid that comes out of it. Professionals in the developing countries believe that there's a direct correlation between how hard they work, how much they pour themselves into the profession, and how well they will succeed. But guess what? In the United States, in the UK, and a couple of other of the developed countries, they no longer think there's a connection there. And these are the winners in society, right? These are the professionals. These are the people who have a way forward. And in the US, They don't think any longer that if they work hard, play by the rules, really sort of do what they're supposed to do, that it will necessarily lead to their success. And that's frightening.
Over here,
There's a lot of other great stuff in there as well, so please look at that poll.
if you could stand up.
My name is Don Flax, formerly from New York. It appears to me that the decisiveness in this country, not only from your poll, but from just listening to things going around, that they're mostly social issues. And I noticed in your poll you said that 90% of the people believe in God. But I also know from polls that were taken recently that there is a 20% of the population that have identified themselves as nuns, N-O-N-E-S, meaning they have no affiliation. Furthermore, 30% of the young people have identified themselves as nuns. So in my opinion, and I also know that when you pose the same question amongst the young people, you don't get the same divisiveness. It appears to me that when we're looking for a circuit breaker, it's the rise of this younger population that's going to ameliorate this decisiveness.
You want to talk about the rise of the millennials and their attitudes and how they're different?
I hate to say it, but we have another poll on the millennials that we just did.
I'll defer to Mark.
We really do. On behalf of Telefonica that was released earlier this month.
No, but you know, what you don't know about young people is what
happens when they get old.
Yes, is what is exactly right. I mean,
That hasn't happened to any of us
you
yet.
know, one of the books we studied in college closely was called Rebellion in the University, and it's because the young people at the time, the same people who would later back Reagan, were the people kind of throwing the chairs and creating the demonstration. So you don't know yet how much these attitudes will change, because when, I would say that, when people typically got married and had children, their whole attitudes towards the community, religion, structure, and then even if they don't want religion for themselves, they decide they want it for their children, changes. Now, whether that's going to happen or not is a little less clear. There's clearly among young people whole new beliefs, I think, in terms of tolerance, having grown up now in a fully multiracial society. In fact, a majority of young people, if you go down the age trains, will be of different races. So it is going to be, they have fundamentally, I think, different attitudes. I'd say not just different attitudes when they're young, but a different life experience that then is likely to carry with them. Their belief that gay marriage, right, is 100% the right thing to do, I think that's going to carry with them. I think a lot of their attitudes on the social issues will carry with them. I think that they don't have experience on the economic issues yet, right? And that therefore, we don't know how they're going to come out on the economics. Young people are very opportunity oriented. They're better educated than at any point in history, right? And in fact, college unemployment remains extremely low, despite stories to the contrary. So we don't know how that part of it's going to come out.
If I could add just quickly, one of the
Could we bring
dogs.
the microphone here for the next question, and then to the gentleman in the orange shirt in the back, Doug?
One of the dogs that isn't barking here is we say we're more divided than we've been than we were during the Vietnam War, but there's no evidence of the kind of generational conflict that existed then, in this poll. And there are a few issues where there's the rising millennials are more liberal than their parents or even grandparents, but across the board, there's a much higher degree, I think, of agreement. And some of that is, again, just although the boomers in some ways became more conservative as they aged, they clearly held on to some of their, at least as, some of the hallmarks of the lifestyle that they embraced back in the 60s.
Question here?
Hi, Jeff Ballish from Los Angeles. I'd just like to challenge your assertion that young people are better educated than any time in history. The OECD just released a report about 2-3 months ago saying the U.S. is one of 2 or 3 countries where the younger generation is dumber, less educated than the older generation.
I'm not sure they used the word dumber.
Right,
You can use that.
Hey, Elliot, I'm not a politically correct guy. We had dinner together. But comment on that. And the second challenge is going all the way back to 65. There's a book written called The Money Game. And the author interviewed guys who were at Lordstown the first robotic GM plant. And the guy said, bust my butt for GM? I wouldn't bust my butt for me. So that's the disease. So you have less education and more entitlement. Let's comment on those and how it affects America going forward.
Yeah, I just, you look at what's happened in the country dramatically from almost President Clinton's presidency on, when going to college was the expectation of about a third, and is now a solid majority expectation. You know, among those who vote, about 5% don't have a high school education. I think that the educated, you know, pool in the country has more or less doubled. So I can't say I can go through, I don't know that study. And at the same time, you'll find a lot of the income inequalities that those that got a college education are just earning considerably more than those that didn't. The second, what was the second part of your
Entitlement.
of entitlement? Well, you know, I do think that's, again, I don't think those issues have played themselves out yet. You know, where the lines are in entitlement, where they are in opportunity. In this poll, young people were still looking for opportunity over entitlement. Don's got experience hiring young people. I don't know what you think of the ones you hire, but I know the ones we hire globally, you know, at Microsoft are energetic, bright, know things that, you know, you never thought young people could know. People have more educated, have more information, more in touch with society in so many different ways. So in many ways, I personally, and through the numbers that I see, reject a lot of those caricatures.
Actually, we've got to move on. We have one more question, please. Thanks.
You did not talk anything about racial attitudes in America or differences, and I wondered if the survey had any content there. And also, you talked about the election of the president having been very divisive. Is there a connection between racial attitudes and that opinion about divisiveness?
We didn't really go into racial attitudes here, though they don't leap out either, even in open-ended questions, much anymore in terms of people's attitudes and what drives divisiveness. And on the question of, you know, why the election of 2012 was regarded as the most divisive, we don't know. I mean, from these data, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that that was not one of the major, not one of the major focuses of the poll, and I think it was Don's observation that this election was more divisive. You know, I'd say you look after this election, and you'd look after Bush's election too. Both those elections were run on the basis of not so much winning over the swing voter, but bringing out the base. And so when you have elections that are won on bringing out the base, the way the electorate looks the day after the election is just the way they looked before the election, which is reasonably divided. 96 and in some of these other elections that have really been about, you know, bringing over the swing voters, you know, President Clinton after 96 had about 65% of the people. He had almost 2/3, so really supporting an agenda moving forward because he ran an election, you know, based on that. And so I think now you're seeing two formulas for elections. One is about bringing over swing voters, and the other now is really turning out the base. And we've seen that on the Democratic and Republican side, and you've seen both formulas win, and one formula tends to be a little more unifying than the other, but they both get you to the same governing place.
What do you expect in 2016?
I expect 2016 will be more about unifying the country and taking it in a direction.
All right. Well, our time is up. I would remind you all that the polls and many more details are at both the Atlantic and Aspen Institute websites. Thank our panel very much.
Thank you.